the announcement by Donald Trump himself, there is a new military operation against Yemen, Ansar Allah. He said, quote, "Your time is up. Your attacks must stop starting today. If they don't, hell will rain upon you like nothing you have ever seen before." Well, the United States and the United Kingdom right now are conducting airstrikes. Now, this is in response to Ansar Allah announcing that it was restarting its naval blockade of the Red Sea and targeting Israeli and Israeli affiliated vessels sailing through that economic corridor. Part of the response from Ansar Allah to restart the blockade was because about 4 or 5 Palestinians a day are being killed and aid has been stopped completely in Gaza.
Trump's hopes of portraying himself as the guy who's going to bring peace around the world has just gone down and been flushed down the toilet. Trump's going to learn a hard lesson out of this, whether he likes it or not. His bombast, "Oh, I'm going to rain hell down on you." He's foolish enough to think that the Biden administration was pulling punches and was just doing love taps on the Houthis, that they weren't launching serious military operations. He's going to discover that they're the greatest, so-called greatest military in the world ain't so great, ain't so powerful, and ain't so effective. The efforts to stop mobile launch missiles in Yemen is going to be a fool's errand for Trump, because no matter how sophisticated the U.S. intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities are, they're not good enough to detect where those mobile missile platforms are. And on top of it, the Houthis have already shot down $500 million, almost $500 million worth of Global Hawks. These drones, they're like go at $30-40 million a pop. The Houthis have been shooting them down repeatedly over the last 15 months. So this is Donald Trump trying to flex muscles, and again, stupidly believing that with threats, with violence, that he's going to stop the Houthis. Well, I judge based upon past experience, the Houthis are very tough customers, and it's going to be impossible for the United States to, quote, defeat them short of wiping them out with a nuclear weapon. Now, I mean, I'm not suggesting that should happen. That's an extreme statement, but the conventional means that the United States are going to use are going to be limited. And in fact, if he's dumb enough to reinsert an aircraft carrier into the Red Sea along with some cruisers and destroyers, they're going to wind up, this time, one of them is going to get sunk. And so all of a sudden, Donald Trump's going to sit there having lost, being blamed for losing a major ship. So this is, and why is this happening? Because the Trump administration is completely bought and subservient to the Zionist lobby. And they have, instead of pursuing an honest, straightforward peace negotiation, have chosen to side with the extremist Zionists. They fired the chief negotiator for Trump the other day because he had the audacity to treat the Hamas folks like they were human beings. And so now, with Israel engaging in more genocidal war crimes by trying to cut off all electricity, food, and water to the people of Gaza, the Houthis finally stood up and said, we're going to fight back. At least the Houthis will stand up on behalf of the people of Palestine, in contrast to the rest of the Arab world.
When the Houthis say they're going to do something, they do it. The United States does not have hypersonic missiles, yet Ansar Allah does. And so they've promised during these airstrikes already that there's going to be a response, and I can bet everything I have on that occurring. So, Ray, where do you see things going, and any response you have to what Larry was saying as well?
Well, I think Larry is quite right in pointing out that the Houthis are not easily challenged or easily obliterated. What I would say is that I find it really ironic I mean, the Houthis are against genocide. They do what they say they're going to do, and that is blockade the Red Sea until the genocide stops. I, Ray McGovern, think that's a good idea. Does that make me a follower of the Houthis? No, it doesn't. But it's ironic that I happen to agree with what they're doing. You know, the stakes are really high here. We are talking about genocide and the United States government not only enabling it, but arming it and making it possible. That dwarfs every other consideration, in my view. And Larry is right. It's the Zionist lobby that's helping this to happen. Well, what was I going to say? Yeah. The other thing is this asymmetrical warfare, right? I made a little note to myself. Oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah, asymmetrical. These damn Houthis, they don't have the big things like we do, like global hawks and other things to make sure they have good intelligence. Okay, well, yeah, but they have the wherewithal. They have the sense of justice that makes them asymmetrical in terms of what the United States is. In the United States, in this administration and the one before it, has a very peculiar sense of justice when it comes to people who don't look like us, like the Palestinians or the people that the Israelis don't like. So asymmetrical, yeah. And isn't it bizarre that one finds himself associated with what the Houthis are trying to do to prevent this from keeping going by blockading? That's not it's against international law, but it's certainly not bombing entire blocks of people in Gaza or in the West Bank. So that's what I would say to this. Trump is acting in a very crazy way, much more crazy with respect to these developments in Southwest Asia than he is in Ukraine. The only slimmer and the only glimmer of hope that I have is that if he succeeds in working out some sort of peaceful arrangement with respect to Russia and Ukraine, well, maybe he'll think that maybe he could act as his own man here and put the Israel lobby in its place and stop the carnage. I don't think he wants to go down as Genocide Joe or Genocide Donald. Okay, so
Right.
what was I going to say about Donald? Yeah, Donald. Well, okay, fair enough. I'll end on that. But I feel real strong about this. It's not a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of justice, and it's a matter of what the U.S. is enabling.
When Donald Trump was elected, he immediately went for a ceasefire in Gaza. He pushed through a May 2024 deal, which Joe Biden decided to conveniently let completely fall through. Part of that reasoning, in my estimation, was because Donald Trump did not want in the beginning of his administration to enter into what had been occurring there, which was a growing regional war that had many different fronts that the United States seemed very hapless in responding to, and it was creating a very dire situation even for Israel. Now, with this bombing of Ansarallah, that threat of this all reemerging and the fighting, it was already a threadbare in Gaza and Lebanon too, continuing again. So what do you make of this, the geopolitical significance of this in particular?
Well, I think that his instincts were right. That is, that he doesn't want all these forever wars in the Middle East. Unfortunately, this is also combined with standing uncritically with Israel, no matter what it does, because as long as there's no Palestinian state, there's no solution. Then either this apartheid or there's ethnic cleansing or genocide, but there has to be something. You can't have a ethno-nation state in which half the population are your ethnicity or your religious group. So because of this, I think the instability within Palestine and the other neighboring countries is going to draw the United States into the region. So we would have to address the source of the conflict. And I very much agree with what was said. That is, if you don't address these issues, you can't just say, well, we want to uphold freedom of navigation. And I would say, yes, well, that's a great principle. But when the blockade is in a direct response to a genocide, which no one is wanting to stand up against in the West, anyone who can put pressure on Israel, then this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think this is the most important thing, because we do love the war unprovoked in Ukraine, and I think the same idea is applied here. Because if it comes out of nowhere, of course, then such reactions will be reasonable, but it does come from somewhere. And also, I'm not sure to what extent this could be successful as well. As Larry said as well, these are not just mobile launchers, but they have a lot of stuff underground. And in regards to the asymmetrical warfare, it's also worth noting that you don't always need the most expensive and best missiles. If you have the quantity and good enough weapons, which are cheap, the mere efforts of intercepting these weapons and it would drain the resources of the United States and any partners who wants to join there. And I guess my a key concern also is this tendency to make big threats and talk a big game. At times it works. Again, put the pressure on Panama. They immediately bent to pressure. They abandoned Belt and Road Initiative, made concessions to the U.S. on passage in the Panama Canal. It worked with the Colombians, and across the board you have countries who are willing to bow to pressure. But what happens in a situation like this when they're not going to bow, and this seems to be quite obvious, they're not going to move away. Well, what happens then? Because now Trump has, he called it his war fighters who has been sent, and they will rain death and destruction on them unless they do as they're told. What happens when it doesn't work? When the response becomes ineffective, becomes too expensive, as was mentioned before, if the U.S. would lose a ship, how is Trump going to react then? Is he going to accept defeat? So it's very difficult to walk back these massive statements. I'll give it to Trump. He has a tendency to be able to get away with almost everything, but of course this is the practical issues. I also think this is a problem with the justice issue here, the morality, because this is not simply a good guy versus terrorists. There is obviously some other problems. The genocide. This is why this is happening, and if we're not able to resolve or respond to the issues in Palestine, then all of this is going to be bombing away at the symptoms, which is just going to make things much, much worse.
Trump has also threatened Iran, even though he signaled that he wants some kind of negotiations. But he's also threatened Iran with military provocations should it essentially not do what the United States wants. So are we witnessing now, with the launch of this military operation, the beginning once again of this powder keg that had been raging throughout the last year and a half of the Biden administration? I believe that Yemen will strike back, and at any moment Israel could use any of these potential flashpoints as an excuse to continue fighting, which there's a lot of pressure inside of Israel to do.
Well, if you would have asked me 3 weeks ago, I was voicing some optimism that perhaps Trump, by virtue of not having to face another election, and despite having received significant funds from Zionist supporters, such as the widow of a Las Vegas tycoon, that he was actually going to chart a more rational course. And, the negotiator that was appointed to deal with Hamas appeared to fall in line with that. Well, I was wrong. Completely wrong. Trump has fallen into the Zionist trap. And, he can rattle sabers all he wants. He can thump his chest. He can scream and holler. And if he decides to launch military attacks on Iran, the United States will face a defeat. I'll predict that right now. That the United States is going to discover that Iran is not some weak, vulnerable country. Trump apparently is ignoring the fact that just right now, as we speak, Iran is conducting joint military naval exercises with China and Russia for the 5th year. This is not something recent. This isn't being done just because of latest developments. These things are planned 12 to 18 months out. So it's part of a reflection of the change that Iran has now realized that It's got to work with China and Russia to secure itself. And then the fact that Russia and Iran signed that important security arrangement on January 17th, 3 days before Trump was inaugurated, that wasn't just a coincidence. That was designed to send a message to the West, a message that Trump isn't hearing. So, yeah, I think we're entering very dangerous waters. This Trump's submission to the Zionists, these murderers, these genocidal maniacs, call them what you want, but his surrendering to them is going to be the death of his presidency. It will bring about failure and collapse for him, because he's going to have to end up explaining the loss of military personnel to these, so-called inferior countries. I mean, good God, they want to bomb the Houthis back into the 14th century. They already live in the 14th century, except they've got hypersonic missiles, as Roy pointed out.
Yeah, they live in the 14th century because they've been fighting Saudi-led, US-backed war there for so many years that decimated the country. Before we were talking about Gaza, we were talking about the humanitarian nightmare that the Yemeni people live in, and yet they continue to fight. Given all these threats toward Iran, what I've noticed is over this period, we've also witnessed critical setbacks for the United States as the hegemon there. Not just Iran's military operations that were launched twice in response, but Yemen as well. Ansarallah showed immense defiance and strength. And then even just people of Gaza and Palestine continuing to fight despite the horrific massacres that they were experiencing. If this explodes again, I 100% agree with Larry. Donald Trump and everything that came with them, the whole MAGA, the Republican resurgence, all of this could go away very quickly. By the next congressional election, it could be wiped out.
Well, one question I have is the Houthis, Al Ansarallah. Is their courage contagious? How about those cowardly Arab leaders who just complain about Israel and what Israel is doing, and it's doing genocide, not only in Gaza now, but on the left bank itself? I think there's a growing chance that even these cowardly Arab nations will be edified by these primitive Houthis and start to exert a little pressure on Israel that they've been unwilling to do before. With respect to Iran, the key here that I would look for would be somebody, some neocon or some Wall Street Journal or Fiona Hill type saying, there's evidence now that the Iranians are working on a nuclear weapon. Okay, now we have to zap them. Okay, what's the problem with that? Well, in 2007, when Bush and Cheney were just about to authorize a joint operation to take care of Iran, so to speak, on their last year out, right? The intelligence community came up with an assessment that Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and had not resumed. Unanimous agreement on that, expressed with good confidence and released by Congress. That stopped the war against Iran that Bush and Cheney fully intended to wage. You can read George W. Bush's memoir, and he says, this deprived me of the military option for how could I authorize a strike on the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community tells me has no active nuclear weapons program. Now, the judgment first voiced at the end in November of 2007 has been revoiced or reiterated every year since. But if you see somebody saying now, somebody from Foreign Affairs or some neocon say, now they're working on a nuclear weapon, Netanyahu was right all along. He's been saying this for years, right? Okay. Then I would worry. Until then, I think we can relax, the more so since Russia and Iran have almost a military agreement here. It's just short of a mutual defense treaty. And as I understand it, U.S. people are talking to the Iranians. unlike before. In other words, they talk to these adversaries. I don't think that's going to happen. I surely hope it doesn't. That's my best guess.
It is going to shape things to come for the United States. A lot of talk on Ukraine, but I feel like we're going to be talking about the Middle East and West Asia a lot in the coming days and weeks ahead.
Well, I guess, just make 2 points. The first related to what Ray was speaking about, which was the weakness of the other leaders in the region. Because keep in mind that not that long ago, people in the region did not seem to care that much about the Houthis at all. But now, of course, many are frustrated by the governments, which seem to do nothing. And meanwhile, the Houthis, who's standing up to this almost alone, has gained much respect. So there's a problem here that a lot of the solidarity and obedience that the US and Israel gets from a lot of the neighbors, it's actually a weakness as well, because it could fuel instability within the countries. You can have problems emerging from Egypt or in Jordan. So this is a big big problem if this can continue to go on for too long. And this is just on the local level, also on the more the global spectrum of things. You have an entry of other great powers as well. That is China, Russia. All of these countries are now having greater interest in the region. And my second point is that Israel itself, it's in very deep trouble at the moment. It has not only exhausted itself to a large extent, fighting Hamas, fighting Hezbollah, and of course occupying Syria. There's a lot of problems now. The army reports on this, and not only have they exhausted themselves in the fighting, but also internally. There's a lot of internal divisions now within Israel, and again, there seems to be more of a consensus there that the only way to get Israel out of all of this, that is to resolve the issues of the external threats as well as backing up the current government, is to bring in America closer. So if you can get the Americans joining a war against Iran, this is something that could resolve all of Israel's problems, because many problems are building up. The only problem here is that the war on Iran will be a complete disaster. The country is huge, it's powerful. The idea that all the Iranians are just waiting to take to the streets and topple the government and praise America for bombing their country, with missiles of freedom, this is also a fantasy. Furthermore, they're going to get backed by other large powers. You mentioned Russia, but also China, if not militarily, at least, well, not directly, but nonetheless. They have formed a closer and closer relations, economic, political, and also military cooperation. So they're not going to just stand by and do nothing. So I think this is the biggest mistake Trump could do if he accepts to join in on a war against Iranians. And if you can convince him that the Houthis are simply doing Iran's bidding, then this could be a logical pathway. But this is also, I think, a very flawed premise. That is, yes, they are allied. Yes, they are both consider themselves part of the resistance against the Zionists. But this is it. Even they do have some autonomy. They have their own policies. This is, if they get roped in going after Iran, I think this would be an incredible disaster. The worst one. I mean, this is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. Iran is something very, very different. So I would be, concerned if Trump would go this direction.